Let's start at the beginning. Before the Aston Martin, before vodka martini, shaken not stirred, became a catchphrase, before Q branch and gadgets and everyone arguing over who the best James Bond is, we meet a man sitting at a card table in a London casino. He's dressed in a midnight blue dinner suit, casually smoking a cigarette, winning a hand against the glamorous lady who thinks she's in control of the table. We don't even see his face straight away. The camera gives us the back of his head, then his hands, his cigarette case, lighter, and those outrageous satin turn-back cuffs. The clothes introduce him before Sean Connery says a single word. The lady, Sylvia Trench, asks his name. He lights the cigarette, looks directly at her, and finally gives us the line that's going to follow him for more than 60 years. Bond. James Bond. It's almost certainly the most confident character introduction in cinema history. But here's the bit that interests me most as a bespoke tailor. The confidence isn't coming from the dialogue alone. The dinner suit, the setting, the way Connery wears his clothes, and the complete lack of fuss are all doing a huge amount of the work. This isn't some bloke who's dressed up because he's been invited to somewhere fancy. This is a man who looks like he belongs in that room, knows the rules better than everyone else, and could leave at any moment without feeling he's missing out on anything. Welcome to Dressing James Bond, a new Tailoring Talk magazine series in which I'm going to take you through all 25 official James Bond films in order, beginning right here with Dr. No and eventually taking us all the way to No Time to Die. I'm Roberto Revilla, a bespoke tailor here in London, and rather than simply compiling a shopping list of every suit, shirt, watch and pair of shoes that Bond has ever worn, I want to look at what these clothes actually tell us about the character, the actor wearing them, and the period in which each film was made before bringing that all back into the real world and asking what you and I can still take from it without looking like we're on the way to a James Bond fancy dress convention. So if you're interested in Bond, menswear, filmmaking, or simply why certain men look completely at ease in their clothes, while others always appear to be trying far too hard, subscribe to the channel or follow Tailoring Talk magazine wherever you listen to your podcasts, because we've got 25 films and more than 60 years of style to explore together. And when you remember that the people making Dr. No had absolutely no idea they were laying down the rules for a film series that would still be running more than 6 decades later, what they achieved becomes even more remarkable. So this is where I want to begin this journey through the wardrobe of the 25 official James Bond films. Not because Dr. No has more clothes than the others, it doesn't, but because almost every idea we now associate with Bond's style either starts here or can be traced back to what they decided to do in 1962. The dinner suit, the restrained tailoring, white and pale blue shirts, dark ties, perfectly chosen casual clothes, and, most importantly, the idea that Bond's clothes should be exceptional without ever looking like he spent the morning trying to dress to impress. It's all there, right at the very start. Before Bond had a uniform. Here's something most viewers forget. Dr. No is based on Ian Fleming's 6th Bond novel, not the first. That was Casino Royale. And it was made on a budget of roughly $1 million, which sounds ridiculous when you compare it with the money thrown around on modern Bond productions. The film premiered at the London Pavilion in Piccadilly Circus on the 5th of October 1962. Fleming's books had already built a loyal readership by then, but cinema audiences hadn't been trained to expect everything they were about to see on screen that we now take for granted. There was no familiar title sequence, no Bond theme in their heads yet, no expectations of exotic locations, the villain's lair, the beautiful women, and that moment when Bond strolls in, immaculate in black tie. There was no Bond film formula because this was the film that was inventing it, and we wouldn't even get to the final formula until 2 whole films later. Sean Connery wasn't the safe casting choice either. He was 31 years old, Scottish, working class, a former milkman and labourer, a bodybuilder and jobbing actor. Physically impressive, no doubt, but could he convince an audience he knew his way around Mayfair casinos, private members clubs and the better end of a wine list? Fleming wasn't sure at first, and Connery has often been described as a rough diamond in stories about the production. The phrase feels a bit patronising now, but it does capture the problem they were trying to solve. They didn't need to turn Connery into a harmless-looking gentleman. That would have stripped away what made him interesting. They needed to put a refined surface around the danger his frame hinted at without completely hiding it. This is where director Terence Young becomes one of the most important figures in the history of Bond style. Young went to Cambridge, served as a tank commander in the Irish Guards during the war, and moved through London's restaurants, casinos and tailoring houses like someone who knew that world from the inside. He took Connery to the right restaurants, introduced him to the rituals of Mayfair, and famously brought him to his own tailor and shirt maker. The Bond we meet in Dr. No is part Ian Fleming, part Sean Connery, and a very significant part Terence Young. There's a long repeated story that Young told Connery to sleep in his suits until they felt like a second skin. Whether he literally slept in them every night is debatable, but the result matters more than the legend. Connery doesn't treat the clothes like fragile museum pieces on loan from the wardrobe department. He sits, drives, runs and fights in them, and occasionally looks like he might well have slept in them, which is exactly why the tailoring feels like part, an extension even, of the man, rather than a costume sitting on top of him. That's a big difference in how clothes are worn, and it's something I'm constantly explaining to my own clients. You should always look like you are wearing your clothes. Your clothes should never wear you. Sean Connery's James Bond is still one of the best examples of that. So who actually dressed him? The film credits Tessa Welborn, also known as Tessa Prendergast, for costumes, with John Brady as wardrobe master and Eileen Sullivan as wardrobe mistress. But Bond's own wardrobe was shaped by a network of professionals orbiting director Terence Young. Bespoke tailor Anthony Sinclair of Conduit Street is rightly associated with Connery's tailoring, and Turnbull Asser with his shirts and ties. The navy Chesterfield overcoat Connery wears has an Anthony Sinclair label dated January 1962, and Young later credited Sinclair with the dinner jacket. More recently uncovered paperwork, though, shows an instruction for a dress suit for Connery to be collected from Benson, Perry and Whitley of Cork Street on the day that M's office sequence was filmed. And Young also credited Lanvin with the dress shirt at one point. Turnbull and Asser have their own record of making the voile evening shirt, and the shirts on screen look very much like their work. Shirtmaker Frank Foster also claimed he supplied some shirts for the film. So with all these claims and bits of evidence, it's tricky to say, as some film historians like to, that Connery's Dr. No wardrobe was mainly Anthony Sinclair plus Turnbull and Asser. They're central to the story, absolutely, but film wardrobes are often produced at speed with budgets and scheduling in mind. That can mean substitutions, duplicates, and multiple suppliers. It makes shoehorning everything into one neat credit potentially dishonest. What we can clearly see on screen is the tailoring language that Sinclair became famous for, later called the Conduit Cut. Soft, natural shoulders with a hint of roping at the sleeve head, room through the chest, gentle suppression at the waist, and a coat that follows the body without clinging. The trousers sit high on the waist, have double forward pleats, room through the thigh, and a clean taper to the shoe. It's classic early 60s British tailoring, but lighter and less rigid than a lot of the heavily structured cuts common at that time, which makes perfect sense if your leading man has to sit, run, and throw punches without splitting any seams. There's a great little exchange between Bond and Felix Leiter that always makes me smile. Leiter asks where he was measured for his suit. Bond replies, "My tailor, Savile Row." Now, Anthony Sinclair was actually on Conduit Street, which runs perpendicular to Savile Row, just off of Regent Street. I suppose Savile Row sounds better than pausing the film to explain the geography of Mayfair tailoring, so we'll let him get away with that one. The dinner suit that created an icon. We must spend some quality time on that first outfit because it might be the single most important dinner suit in film history. The suit is midnight blue, that very dark navy that can look richer and darker than black under artificial light. In my workroom, we usually describe midnight blue as the last stop before you get to black. In cloth books, it's often so dark you have to present it right next to a black fabric to see that it's navy at all. The jacket is a classic one-button, single-breasted dinner jacket with a generously shaped shawl lapel, faced in matching satin. Jetted hip pockets, no flaps, a neat white linen pocket square at the breast, sleeves finished with satin gauntlet cuffs, turn-back cuffs, each with 4 satin-covered buttons. The trousers sit properly high on the waist, have double forward pleats, and a satin braid running down the outer leg seams. Underneath, Bond wears a white cotton voile evening shirt with a spread collar, pleated front, mother of pearl buttons, and double cuffs held with simple gold cufflinks. The black satin bow tie is narrow, hand-tied, and finished with diamond-shaped ends. Very fashionable at the time, and, ironically, one of the few things that dates the outfit more than the actual suit itself. On his feet, plain black evening shoes, generally identified as patent leather plain-toe Oxfords. The white pocket square is the last little bit of contrast that stops the jacket becoming one big dark block. 2 details here annoy strict black tie purists. The jacket has double vents when traditional dinner jackets are supposed to have none, and Bond isn't wearing a cummerbund or waistcoat to cover the waistband. Yet the outfit still works because the proportions are so good and nothing is shouting. Even the gauntlet cuffs, which could look theatrical on the wrong man, only really show themselves in close-ups and through movement. They're a discovery, not a performance. I love the shawl collar on Connery. It gives the jacket a smooth, predatory line from the back of the neck down to the button. It softens just enough of his width without diluting the power. Put narrow notch lapels on that physique and he'd look like he'd wandered in wearing an office suit with some silk glued onto it. Give him huge peak lapels and your eye gets dragged out to the shoulder ends and he starts to look bulky. The shawl collar frames him perfectly. Elegance and threat in the same stroke. This is a really useful lesson whenever someone asks me if they should copy a famous suit exactly. The answer is almost always no. What works on Sean Connery's body and face isn't automatically going to work on yours. And the aim isn't to buy a James Bond costume. The aim is to understand the decisions they made for that specific man and take inspiration from it rather than be wholly influenced. Connery needs a cut that can accommodate his broad chest and shoulders, give him shape through the waist and create a clean vertical line without squeezing him. Someone with narrower shoulders, a longer face, or a different posture might need a completely different lapel shape and overall balance to get the same effect. What you should copy is the restraint. Midnight blue rather than bright royal or electric blue. One beautifully shaped lapel instead of clever detailing everywhere. A self-tied bow tie rather than a pre-tied cheat code elastic horror. Trousers with a slightly higher rise than most men have become used to. And a shirt that's interesting because of its fabric and cut, not because someone's added black buttons, piping and a wing collar to make it look fancy. Bond's dinner suit doesn't beg to be photographed. It just looks perfect whenever the camera finds it. The navy Chesterfield overcoat he wears over it for the late night visit to M follows the same philosophy. Dark, clean and formal without decoration. It lets Bond move from casino to office without changing the message. He's still the same man, but now the glamour of the dinner suit is covered by the more anonymous surface of a government employee. 3 grey suits and 1 very warm arrival. Once Bond reaches Jamaica, the film gives him 3 grey lounge suits and a navy blazer. By later Bond standards, that's a tiny wardrobe, but it's enough to establish a way of dressing. He arrives in a dark grey flannel 2-piece suit, pale blue shirt, dark navy grenadine tie, white linen pocket square, black 3-eyelet derby shoes, and a green felt trilby. The jackets are 2-button with relatively narrow lapels, jetted hip pockets and double vents. The trousers carry on the high-rise, double forward pleats, side adjusters and turn-ups. He looks fantastic, but the first time I saw it, my tailor brain screamed, "What on earth are you wearing in that climate?" Flannel is wool and it's insulating. My own flannel suits don't leave the wardrobe until October or November each year. Arriving in Jamaica dressed like that is brave, to say the least. You can defend it by saying he's travelled from cold London, aircraft cabins weren't as climate controlled back then, and he hadn't had the chance to change yet. All fair points. But Bond is supposed to be extraordinarily well travelled. You'd expect him to know exactly what stepping off a plane into Caribbean heat feels like. There's a broader lesson here that goes way beyond James Bond. An outfit can be beautiful on its own and still be completely wrong for the day. Men get so fixated on matching colours or pleasing a dress code that they forget weather, movement and context are all part of being well dressed. A 13-ounce flannel suit is magnificent in London in January. Wear it to a meeting in Jamaica and you're not showing commitment to classic menswear, you're showing you packed badly and you're not paying any attention. The suit still earns its place in the film because it tells us what Bond looks like in his normal London uniform. Dark grey flannel was a staple, not a statement. On another man, it might disappear into the background, which is kind of the point. The audience sees Connery rather than a loud suit. The clothes are expensive and exceptionally well cut, but they don't advertise either of those things to people who don't know what they're looking at. When he changes, the choices become far better suited to Jamaica. There's a lightweight black and white Glen check suit, probably worsted wool or woolen mohair, that reads as mid-grey from a distance and only reveals its pattern when you get closer to it. There's also a light grey woolen mohair suit whose slight sheen really comes alive in Caribbean light and still works into the evening at Puss Fella's Club. Mohair is a clever warm weather fibre. It adds crispness, airflow and resistance to creasing, so the suit keeps its shape in heat where softer cloths would start collapsing. It photographs beautifully as long as you're careful with the shine. Too much and it can look synthetic. Here they get the balance right. Connery looks sharper and more polished without ever looking flashy. That grey mohair suit is the one that prompts Leiter's Savile Row question, and it's easy to see why. Bond's being held at gunpoint, yet the suit helps his overall demeanour look calm and controlled. That sounds like an overstatement until you've worn truly good tailoring. The shoulders help you hold yourself together, the chest has room so it doesn't pinch, the waist is shaped but not straining, and the trousers aren't grabbing at your legs. Compare that with some of the very tight suits we see much later in the series. Bond occasionally looks one jump away from a split crotch, and you understand why comfort is part of elegance. The third combination is a navy doeskin blazer with dark grey flannel trousers. Again, beautiful, but again, far too heavy for Jamaica. Doeskin is a smooth, dense type of flannel. It gives the blazer a rich surface, and gunmetal buttons keep it more understated than the classic shiny gold naval buttons. He wears it with the same pale blue cocktail cuff shirt, navy grenadine tie, pocket square and black shoes. It's Bond's version of relaxed evening dressing. I like the gunmetal buttons a lot because they make the jacket useful without turning it into fancy dress. Many men dismiss blazers because they picture bright gold buttons, a crest on the breast pocket, and a man who's about to complain that the yacht club has changed the lunch menu again. Swap the buttons, soften the contrast, and suddenly you've got one of the most versatile jackets a man can own. Would I make this exact blazer in heavy doeskin for a client heading to Jamaica? Absolutely not. I'd keep the colour and the subtle metal buttons, but I'd use an open weave hopsack or fresco wool and pair it with tropical wool trousers instead of flannel. That's how you take inspiration from Bond without mindlessly recreating his mistakes. The small details do most of the talking. Strip these outfits down and the palette is incredibly simple. Grey suits, pale blue and white shirts, dark navy ties, black shoes, white linen pocket squares. Yet it never feels boring because the interest comes from texture, proportion and a few subtle personal details. The navy ties are almost grenadine, a woven silk with an open texture that catches the light differently from smooth satin. From a few feet away it looks like a normal dark tie, which is exactly what an intelligence officer might want. Up close you see depth and subtlety. The knot is small and straightforward, not inflated into some giant double Windsor. And the width of the tie matches the lapels. Everything is in proportion. The pale blue shirts are important too. Turnbull Asser described their brief as creating a simple, masculine wardrobe for Connery's build with a higher collar band and a medium cutaway collar instead of the shorter collars and tiny points that were very popular at the time. The fabric has that luster you get with fine Sea Island cotton. The cocktail cuff folds back on itself, a softer take on a double cuff, and fastens with buttons instead of cufflinks. That cuff becomes one of Bond's signatures in this movie because it sits right between ordinary and showy. Most people in the room wouldn't notice it. The few who care about shirts and those small details will. That's a much more convincing way to show taste rather than shouting about it. There's a nice irony in that Professor Dent also wears a version of cocktail cuffs reportedly made by Frank Foster, but his clothes are deliberately more ordinary and less polished. The detail alone doesn't make the man stylish. Bond's wardrobe works because all the decisions belong to the same concept. The shoes follow that principle. Outside of black tie, he wears simple black leather derbies with very little decoration. There are stories that John Lobb supplied shoes during Connery's Bond years, but it isn't clear that the shoes in Dr. No can be confidently attributed to Lobb, so I wouldn't present that to you as a fact. On screen, what matters is that the shoes are polished, discreet, and capable of moving between office, airport, and evening, and are also comfortable. The derby is my own preferred style of dress shoe because its open lacing construction gives you more adjustability and usually more room across the instep than an Oxford, so it can be extremely comfortable while still looking perfectly smart. It's timeless, but to my eye it also has more panache than the more formal Oxford. Even the folded white handkerchief deserves a mention. It appears with the suits as well as the dinner suit and gives every jacket a crisp finishing point, but it never tries to match the tie or become the star of the show. If you're nervous about pocket squares because you think they make a suit look affected, this is the way to wear one. White linen, straight fold, put it in, forget about it. Bond dresses down without giving up. When Bond heads to Crab Key, the tailoring disappears and we get his only true casual outfit of the film. A light blue short-sleeved cotton piqué polo shirt, matching light blue cotton trousers and navy canvas deck shoes, usually with 2 eyelets and dark laces, although a continuity error switches them to slip-ons in one shot. By modern standards, it's probably the most dated combination because the almost monochrome powder blue can look a bit uniform-like, but it still teaches us something. Bond hasn't confused casual with giving up. The polo has a proper knitted collar and cuffs. The trousers are tailored with side adjusters rather than dragged in with a belt. The overall line stays clean enough that Connery looks purposeful even in short sleeves. We should remember this is reconnaissance clothing, not resort wear. In Fleming's novel, Bond equips himself with cheap black canvas jeans, a dark blue shirt and rope-soled shoes. The film lightens the palette for the Caribbean setting. The pale blue connects him visually with the sea and the sky, and it lets Coral's darker clothes and Honey Ryder's ivory bikini register immediately when they share the frame. Would I wear the polo and trousers in precisely the same shade now? Probably not. I'd keep the blue polo, that's still an easy, flattering summer piece, and put it with stone, cream or tobacco trousers to create a bit of separation. I'd also resist buying a heavily branded reproduction just because someone slapped 007 on the label. The appeal of this outfit is that it doesn't need logos or a complicated story. It's just a good polo and well-cut trousers on a man in great shape. Sometimes menswear really is that simple. The Rolex Submariner on Bond's wrist contributes subtly too. It's a functional dive watch rather than a delicate dress piece, and it sits naturally with both the suits and the Crab Key clothes because Bond treats it like equipment. Again, it doesn't look like he's picked a different watch that morning to make sure anyone notices. Dr. No takes control of the wardrobe. After Bond and Honey are captured, scrubbed down and dressed by their host, the film does something really clever. It takes Bond out of his wardrobe and puts him in Dr. No's world. Bond's given a dark brown raw silk Nehru-style jacket with a stand collar and stone cotton trousers. Honey's dressed in an outfit from the same weirdly well-stocked wardrobe. Connery looks perfectly good in the jacket because he can carry off almost anything, but it clearly isn't his choice. That's the point. For the first time in the film, someone else is deciding how Bond appears. Dr. No uses clothing to create distance. Joseph Wiseman's high-collared tunic, simple silhouette and metallic hands make him look neither like the British officials Bond's left behind, nor the local characters in Jamaica. His costume places him outside ordinary Western tailoring and foreshadows the series' habit of putting villains in narrow jackets and high collars when they see themselves as culturally and intellectually above everyone else. There's also a practical power game at the dinner table. Dr. No has taken Bond's weapons, removed or destroyed his clothes and supplied the replacements, and invited him to eat inside a room of his own design. Bond still has his wit, but every visible element belongs to his captor. Clothing is being used as both hospitality and domination at the same time. Later, when Bond escapes through the ventilation system in a white undershirt and increasingly ruined clothing, the polished surface is finally stripped away. The film takes him from that perfect dinner suit at the beginning down to the most basic layer a man can wear. And Connery's physicality takes over completely. The clothes establish that he could walk into any room. Their destruction shows he can survive when none of those social protections are left. Honey Ryder and the outfit everybody remembers. For all the importance of Bond's dinner suit, the most famous piece of clothing in Dr. No probably belongs to Ursula Andress. Honey Ryder walks out of the sea in an ivory cotton bikini with a broad military-style belt, brass fittings and a large knife at the hip. The image became so famous the series quotes it directly 4 decades later when Halle Berry comes out of the water in Die Another Day, then flips it in Casino Royale by making Daniel Craig the body that's being observed. The bikini's often lazily attributed to Tessa Welborn alone, but Andress described it as a collaboration. Welborn, a Jamaican designer who knew Andress from Rome, was asked to provide her wardrobe. The two of them adapted the garment to Andress's body. Accounts differ over how happy they were with the original designs and who made the final crucial tweaks, which is why the collaborative version is more believable than pretending one person waved a magic wand and created the icon. What makes the costume powerful isn't just how revealing it is, although in 1962 that was undeniably part of the shock. It mixes sensuality with utility. The cotton isn't sparkling, the colour belongs to the beach. The belt gives structure, and the knife instantly tells us Honey isn't just decoration. She's collecting shells for money on a dangerous island, and she's equipped herself accordingly. It's also a clever translation of Fleming. In the novel, Honey Chile Ryder is introduced wearing only a leather belt and knife. That was never going to make it into a mainstream 1962 film unchanged. The bikini keeps the belt, the blade, and the startling entrance, but reshapes it into something the censors would pass, and something that would influence swimwear for years to come. There are aspects of how Dr. No presents women and ethnicity that haven't aged well, and we shouldn't pretend otherwise just because the clothes are beautiful. Miss Taro is framed through an exoticized idea of Asian femininity. Honey is very obviously introduced through the male gaze. Wiseman's Dr. No is a European-American actor playing a character of Chinese and German heritage. Looking at costume properly means looking at the cultural assumptions it carries, as well as admiring cut and colour. A film can be historically important, incredibly stylish, and uncomfortable in places at the same time. So what can we actually take from Dr. No now? The wrong lesson would be that you need a midnight blue replica dinner suit, a cocktailed cuff shirt, a vintage Rolex Submariner and a holiday in Jamaica before you can dress like James Bond. That's how style turns into shopping and admiration turns into costume. The useful lesson is that Bond's wardrobe is built around consistency. He has a limited palette that suits his complexion and works in a lot of situations. His clothes are cut for his body, not for a mannequin or whatever fashion silhouette happens to be popular at the time. Their quality reveals itself slowly through cloth, fit and construction. The few distinguishing details are subtle enough that he never looks like he's trying to show them off to you. For a modern wardrobe, that could mean a well-cut grey suit in a cloth that makes sense for your climate, a navy blazer with understated buttons, pale blue and white shirts, dark textured ties, black shoes kept in good condition, and a proper dinner suit if your life actually gives you a reason to wear one every now and then. It could also mean some well-fitted quality polo shirts and tailored cotton trousers instead of assuming that casual actually means sportswear. More importantly, it means dressing for the room you're in without being intimidated by it. Bond knows the code at the casino, at the office, at Government House and at the nightclub, but the code never erases him. That's what most men are really asking for when they want help dressing for a big meeting, a wedding, or a formal event. They don't want to become someone else. They want to understand the rules well enough that they can stop worrying about their clothes and focus on why they're there. That's what Terence Young, Anthony Sinclair, Turnbull Asser, Tessa Welborn and the rest of the wardrobe team achieved with Connery. They didn't smooth away the roughness. They polished everything around it so his rough edge became part of the charm. And I think that's why Dr. No still works so well. Later Bond films will give us bigger wardrobes, louder fashion statements, and clothes people can identify down to a product number on a website before the film even opens. This first film establishes something the series is at its best when it remembers this rule. James Bond shouldn't look like a man deliberately showing off expensive clothes. He should look like a man who has more important things on his mind. If I'm judging Dr. No purely on climate, there are mistakes. The flannel suit and heavy doeskin blazer have no business being in Jamaica, and the matching powder blue casual outfit is more costume than it is clothing. Yet, as the first attempt to create a complete visual identity for Bond, it's amazingly confident. The dinner suit alone changes how cinema imagines the sophisticated action hero, and the grey suit set a standard of restrained British tailoring that every later Bond wardrobe either follows, rebels against, or tries to rediscover. For me, Dr. No earns 9.5 out of 10 for style, with the missing half point probably lost somewhere inside that very warm flannel suit. Now, I want to know what you think. Is that midnight blue dinner suit still the greatest first appearance in film style history? And if you could take one piece from Bond's Dr. No wardrobe and put it into your own, which one would you choose? We've got 24 films still to come in this journey, so if you've enjoyed this first episode, make sure you subscribe to Tailoring Talk magazine and come back for the next one, because we're heading to Istanbul and boarding the Orient Express for one of my favourite Bond films, if not my absolute favourite, From Russia with Love, where the wardrobe expands, the tailoring becomes even more confident, and James Bond starts looking less like a new screen character and more like a permanent cultural British institution. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to Tailoring Talk magazine and let me know your favourite Dr. No outfit in the comments, because I'll be reading them, every single one of them, before we record the next episode. If you're listening to the podcast, follow Tailoring Talk magazine in your podcast app, so From Russia with Love appears automatically as soon as it's released. Until then, thank you very much for watching or listening, and I'll see you next time for From Russia with Love.